and get us started with our session. So this is the welcome. So this is session 1 of the RTSC practicum. One thing I thought would be helpful as we get started is if you would just think about for yourselves one thing you'd like to get out of the practicum to share with the group. And then what we'll do is we'll just go around, and if you can let us know your name and where you're dialing in from, and then something that you're curious about getting out of the practicum. And just to give you a heads up, there are actually 14 of you in total. And as I had said, Raj Bendre is in Mumbai, and so at 5:30 in the morning, he said he would give it a go and see. And then Mariam Lesage, who will be in the Conversation Cafe, hopefully, is in Paris, France. So we likely won't see her on any of these sessions, but hopefully we'll get to know her in the base camp. So let's just go around. If we start, Bert, with you, I'll just call out the names, and if you're able to share one thing, if you need to pass to keep thinking, that's okay. Give me a heads up on that too. So Bert.
Yeah, good. So for me, I was made aware of this, I think, most passionately by John Fraser, who is quite an advocate of this program, and it spoke to me. What he got out of it is the same interest I have, which is learning how to be more facile with polarities and real-time strategic change as it relates to doing consulting work with organizations. So I am not yet as conversant or fluent as I'd like to be, with these principles. I think it brings a lot of power and leverage to really, just space validity for people right away, so that they get that we get their issues and challenges. And then, of course, everything that I think this will unlock about, real on-the-ground ways of making a difference for people in organizational life. So that's my main interest.
Great. Thanks. And you're calling in from where, Bert?
I am in Dallas, Texas.
All right. Terrific. Bert, you're up next.
That was Bert.
Thanks, Bert. So, Merge.
Hey, this is Merge Simon, and I'm calling from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. What I am interested in getting out of the practicum is perhaps a more concrete way of implementing polarity thinking strategies in order to develop a new program and implement it. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to focus on concrete strategies for implementing polarity thinking in a particular program.
Great. And I think for both of you, this is a very applied practicum where the name came from. And so being able to take this into the work that you're doing, not only with the project that you may select, but any of the other work that you're doing is one of the promises of the practicum. So I think we're in good shape with that. Becky, can you share with us where you are and where you're headed, and something that you're interested in getting out of the practicum?
Sure. Can you hear me, Dick?
Yep, hear you just fine.
Okay. Well, I'm in the Chicago suburbs on 294, driving home to Michigan, where I live. And what I'm interested in getting out of the practicum are, I'll use your term, concrete ways to accelerate projects that I'm working on. So I'm looking to find ways to speed up the development and implementation, say, of leadership development project that I'm working on, so that we can move with great urgency and all due speed.
Great. I think you're in the right place for that. Good. Thanks. Renata.
Yeah, hi. I'm Renata DeChambeau. I live kind of north of Seattle, so I'm in the Seattle area. And my interest in this is sort of twofold. One, I know I'm only supposed to do one, but they're connected. At work, I work for a regional energy company, and we're really, as an OD consultant, and we're really looking at our change management philosophies right now. And so this was a perfect time to kind of delve deeper into this polarities idea, which is sort of a personal interest of mine through some studies and stuff I've done. So it's kind of marrying two interests, one very practical at work. I'm also very interested in sort of embedding this polarity thinking in our organizations. So I'm hoping this is a great opportunity while we're looking at change to kind of marry the two together.
Great. Great. Welcome, Renata. Sherry.
Okay. I'm Sherry Black. I'm in Northville, Michigan. I'm a consultant and executive coach. I've been working on my PhD for the last 2 years, and I am very interested in Jake's work. I've always been a fan of his. I'm very interested in taking the principles of his new book and incorporate that in my work as I am re-entering the work of consulting and coaching as I work on my thesis. And I'm looking forward to learning from his workshop as we go forward.
Great. Welcome, Sherry. And then Derek.
My name's Derek Birch. I'm calling in from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And what I'm looking for is to really use the real-time strategic change principles to reinvigorate an existing project that I'm leading at our organization to really drive change at our organization in a quick and efficient way.
Good. Nice. Thanks, Derek. Has anybody else joined, or do we have the whole crew now? Okay, so what I'm going to do as a norm in the sessions is that there's some material that I'll be covering, and then if you have questions as I'm going through it, I welcome those, and also we'll have some times where I'll pause and check in and see whether the understanding's clear and if there are questions about that. And then there's also work that you'll be doing as we go through each of the sessions. So the purpose of this first session really is what we're calling hitting the ground running. So the project, you may not have selected one yet, which is fine. And you may end up with more than one project, which is also fine. But what we want to do in this first session is model and experience the real-time strategic change. So it's something where we're going to start making progress in addition to just talking about progress. So what you have up here on the slide is some of my background, so that if you have some sense, I titled it Consultant, Author, Teacher, and Learner, because all of those speak to work that I do. And the teaching and learning is something that is a polarity unto itself, that really focusing on the best that you can get from teaching and the best you can get from learning will really lead to the best knowledge and impact in the world. You can see some of the books that I've written in the center, as well as some of the places that I've taught. And Michigan is in the center because I went to undergrad there, and then the MSOD is the Pepperdine program that I got my master's in organization development. The purpose, and because RTSC is very purpose-driven, purpose and outcomes are identified in each of these sessions very clearly. So this is about moving further, faster, and hitting the ground running in the practicum itself. And our agenda, which we'll have for each of these sessions, that there's some work around session 1, and getting clear on the work. I'll show you that each session, what we're going to be focused on is also something that I spent some time defining, and we'll be able to talk about that. And then we'll take a look at the case, which you can look at through the individual, team, or organizational level. And for each of the sessions, there's an RTSC mantra or insight that I'm going to introduce and then talk about how that shows up in the case. And throughout, we'll be applying the principles to the case, which is why I'd asked you to print those worksheets out so that you could track along with me and be able to see where you saw the principles showing up in the case, and then I could tell you where I saw them showing up in the case. There's a little background noise. I'm not sure who that is. It's a little squeak. But if you check for yourself, you can either put yourself on mute or find the source of the squeak and hold off on that. So that's about session 1. The practicum purpose overall is creating fast and lasting results. So at the end of this, what I really want, what the promise of the practicum is that you'll be able to take this not just to apply the principles or to better understand polarity thinking, but really to be able to create fast and lasting results in any work that you're doing. So the kind of thing, Becky, that you were talking about, you can use that with a leadership development program. You ought to be able to, at the end of the practicum, use this with any work that you're doing. Last session in the fall, there were people doing individual coaching, there were people doing team development, there were people doing large-scale change. All of them were able to apply the principles. And some of this is a little review from the introductory session that a number of you joined. But when we look at RTSC, what's most noted are the tools and techniques, whether it's large group sessions or design teams that help plan those sessions, different leadership alignment work, but it's most visible at the top of this pyramid and most flexible as you go down through the pyramid. So we'll be talking about different areas of work in real-time strategic change and the principles at the heart of the matter, and how this is an approach to change, and then ultimately how you think, act, and be in the world, how you can start to see the world through the lens of real-time strategic change and its principles will give you the greatest flexibility that you can apply it anywhere. And at the same time, it has the least visibility because it's something that gets embedded in you as a practitioner. And the work that you've done today, different models and theories and approaches that you've used, some of them have become part of your being, part of how you make sense of the world. And what we're talking about with RTSC is the same thing can be true, that we can embed this very deeply into all of the work you're doing. The other thing I want to point out is that real-time strategic change plays well with others. And by that I mean that you don't have to let go or stop doing any work that you're already doing or how you're doing it. This is not to say this is a replacement. This is, in a true polarity sense, a supplement. This is a turbocharger to work that you're already doing and how you're already doing your work. I just want to pause at this point and check in if there are any questions that people have just as we get started. So this is what I put down as critical success factors, and there's things that I'm going to be bringing to the table that you can see in terms of the content, and also a very active participant in that conversation cafe at Basecamp. Some of you have gotten into that a little bit, and you are welcome to be as active as you want and need to be, but I will be responding to everything that goes up there, as well as posting a number of things that may occur to me based on the sessions or articles or tools, things that come to me. That's the home for them. And what I'm asking really is, at the end of the day, to have you be actively engaged in the experience. And so take advantage of the opportunities for interim assignments. There will be interim assignments between each of the sessions so that you can go out and practice what you're learning. And also, as you have ideas to suggest to me to improve the practicum, I'm very open to those. We made a couple of really nice changes in the fall based on feedback that I had gotten. So proactive energy, use it in your project, commitment to apply it, and then this ongoing feedback. So that's what I am asking for from you. And, you know, this is quite common. You get out of it what you put in. And so you can count on me putting a heck of a lot in. It's really important to me that you get great value out of this and great opportunities to apply RTSC out in the worlds in which you live. So this is the section, we'll have this in every practicum, which is, why is this work important to do? What is this work? How do we know we've done it well? And then how do we do this work? So there's a really good architecture to the time we're going to be spending together, so that each time you'll have this as something that you can count on. So getting clear on the work for this session, so why is it important? Well, what we're talking about is having it happen here and now. And the more congruent your experience in the practicum itself can be with RTSC, the more that you'll understand it and benefit from it. And this piece about building community, the Conversation Cafe led to a number of people having conversations offline with each other, emails going back and forth. Some things got posted in the Conversation Cafe by people, some of it didn't. But the more we can focus on this being a learning community collectively, the better experience everybody will have. What is the work then of this first session? It's about gaining insight into the background of the situation I'm going to describe by looking at it through the principles and these mantras or these sayings that I'm going to be introducing in each session. How do we know we've done it well? Well, you'll start getting some early ideas about what may be happening in the case, deeper understanding of the mantras and principles, and also start to translate it so that you can see, you know, okay, this is how Jake used it in this project, but the question is, how am I going to use it in mine? And so we'll spend time either talking about that specifically on the webinars, but also you can come to that in the Basecamp site. And there's also something that you have, which is a version of unlimited shadowing with me during the course of the practicum. If you have questions or you have ideas or you want me to look at something, all you need to do is reach out with a phone call or an email, or put something up in Basecamp that says I'd like to contact you directly, and I'm happy to think through things with you so that we can make sure that we embed what the learning is and what the results are that you achieve. And then how do we do it? Well, get some insight from these RTSC elements. And the principles, what we're going to do is go through the case, as I said, and look where the principles apply. Where do they show up? And I'll call some of those out, but not all of them, so that you can also, as we go through this, identify some for yourselves where you see these principles showing up. And I'll cover the principles in a little bit more depth. So these are dates, just so that we're clear where we're headed. So this is the 19th of March, which is that session. And then in April, there will be 3 sessions on the 2nd, the 16th, and the 30th. All of these are 8 p.m. Eastern time is what's noted there. And then there will be 3 sessions in May as well. So we have the 30th, the 14th, and the 28th. The recordings are all going to be uploaded to YouTube, and they'll be available there. Somebody asked last session, and I said, well, as long as YouTube's in business, these videos will be available for you. And as I said, we'll cover both the videos from the webinar sessions, but also from the interim assignments. And I think a couple folks took a look at that overview video. I know Tom Hardison, who said he couldn't be here tonight, but he had looked at it, and a couple people had mentioned them. The other thing is everybody is welcome to an ebook download of the Real-Time Strategic Change book. And I believe that I've got everybody, but I needed to check with Mert to see whether you needed a copy of that. And if anybody does, just to shoot me an email on that, and I'll make sure you get a coding that'll take you to the Barrett-Kohler site. And then finally, this is the Basecamp, and there's a simple sign-in with your email and a password. And then for those who haven't been there yet, this is what it looks like. You can upload a picture, and then there are different discussions, and you can start a new discussion just by clicking at the top here. This one is on the RTSC overview video question and answer. And so this is one where I'd put this up first, but again, the Conversation Cafe is open for everybody to be able to add whatever they have as interests. And Raj Bendre from Mumbai, it appears to me, has just joining the session. So you know how they give awards for the furthest driving to the session? I think he gets the award for the furthest webinar to the session. So let's go back to session one purpose. So we want to hit the ground moving further and faster. There's also outcomes. So begin understanding the mantras and mindsets. We'll learn the definitions in this session again, and how do they guide decisions and actions in real work. So there's no outcomes, there's also be outcomes, right? And be excited about the prospects of the value, and be confident in how to gain value from the practicum. So at the end of the session, those are two things that I'm targeting that will have you be, and then do. What will you be capable of doing is starting to translate these mantras and principles into your work, and to prepare to leverage the interim period between sessions 1 and 2, not just with the assignment that I'm going to give you, which will be videotaped so that you can look at that on YouTube and see how I completed it, but in any work that you're doing between sessions 1 and 2. I want to pause again and check in if there are any questions that people have on what I've covered so far. Raj?
Yeah, hi. Good evening.
Welcome, Raj. Or good morning, Raj.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I got the time a little wrong, so it's I thought it was at 6:30 a.m. my time. And then when I got this WebEx again, I saw that it's started about half an hour earlier, I guess. So.
Well, welcome along, and you can either follow with the PDF that I sent, or if you can see the screen, I'm on slide 25.
Yes. Okay.
So this is something that I'd mentioned in the introductory session. This is the case that we're going to be following. And it was work that I had done with colleague Jesse Stoner. And it was a very large apparel retailer doing work in Europe, and wanting to grow fast, wanting to accelerate its growth throughout Europe. They had been based mostly in England, and so they were looking at other countries in Italy and in Germany and in France, and they had conflicts between what were called merchandising and sales. And so these are set up like design, engineering, and manufacturing in a manufacturing company. There's built-in tension. The merchandising folks were the ones who would go out and set up the stores, and the salespeople were the ones who went out as buyers to the suppliers. So there were issues that they had between each other. The immediate results, and we covered this again in the last couple introductory sessions. So immediately more funding from corporate, roles were defined, delivered on, and they had new store openings and a new country opening in Poland. This was something, I'll just let you look at these, but these are the results that they had achieved over a 5-year period. They're really solid results in terms of growth and really solid results in terms of the kind of organization it was to work in. In fact, I just a couple weeks ago spoke with the man who'd been the CEO at the time of this work, and he was talking to me about how proud he was of the kind of organization they'd created as well as the results that they'd achieved. And then the CEO of the parent company had this quote in their annual report, which goes to show you that there was a lot of attention and appreciation for the good work that was done by the organization. So, and Raj, I don't know, I think there might be some background noise from you.
I thought I'm on mute here. Give me a second.
So, this is the first of the RTSC mantras. Start anywhere. There we go. Start anywhere, be willing to go everywhere. So in this project, we began work in a buying meeting to introduce this new strategy. So it was a 150-person meeting. There were these issues around accountability and support, but what we did is we worked with a planning team that had members from the buying organization and defined what the work was. So we didn't start work directly with the CEO and the senior team. It wasn't, designed with a dominant coalition or Kotter's 10 steps, but we saw an opportunity. And so start anywhere, be willing to go everywhere means you seize the opportunity. There's informed opportunism. You find where there's a window, and that's where you start. And that's a very RTSC-like way of operating. The areas of RTSC work, there are 3 of them, and we talk about them as areas because they're iterations. You move between them. You see, again, what work needs to be done. The first one that I'll describe is called scoping possibilities. And we'll talk more about what that means, but really it is about looking out at all of the different possibilities of what the work could be and how you could do it. And then the scoping, which is more typical of bringing scope and boundaries to the work. But from an RTSC standpoint, we really pay attention to looking at all the possibilities before we begin the scoping. Developing and aligning leadership and followership. This used to be called leadership alignment years ago, and then had this insight that said, well, it's not just about alignment, but there's development, because leaders, in order to lead in a new organization, often need new knowledge, skills, and abilities. So developing and aligning leadership. And then as I was working on the last practicum, I looked at it and I said, well, this does not actually accurately describe the nature of the work, because followership is as important as leadership. And so putting that in as a specific and concrete element of the work made a lot of sense. There are colleagues of mine, the Hurwitzes, who are based in Toronto and have a company called Flip Skills. You can find it, I believe, flipskills.com, have a new book that they just came out with that talks about leadership is not the whole story. And Ira Chaleff, Chaleff, has a book that he wrote about 10 years ago called The Courageous Follower. So there's more and more work done in this area of followership, and we'll spend some time on that as we move through the practicum. And then creating organization-wide congruence. So this is about how do we line up the culture, the strategy, the systems, the processes, all of these things that when you can have a congruent organization all the way back to and including its identity, then you have a level of congruence beyond alignment. And I'll talk more about that as we get into the practicum, but this notion of organization-wide congruence is something that's really important. And so we continue to go back to the well to figure out what are the pieces that aren't fitting, what are the pieces that need to be shaped and reshaped so that they fit into the organization and the organization fits into them in a way that reduces the friction coefficient. And that's part of where speed comes from. Here are the RTSC principles. And on this slide, as we go through them, and if you've copied these pages off, you can see that making reality a key driver, there's each of these is defined as a polarity. And so these poles, or these interdependent pairs, here the reality is about knowing the outside of the organization and the inside. So the outside talks about all of the things like the industry trends, competition, new technology, all of the things that are happening outside the organization. And inside is systems, process, culture, people, strategy, all of these things that we say if we're smart about both of them, we can have informed decisions and actions. Engaging and including used to say you had more commitment and better answers. So what we looked at now is to say that a lot of people talk about getting somebody on board. And in a RTSC world, we don't talk about getting people on board. We talk about people getting themselves on board. And so the commitment is a piece of this, but also getting good engagement and inclusion also means you get better answers. There's more information available and there's smarter answers. And this comes from the paradox of providing direction and inviting participation. So some of the time, what I've said is the most engaging thing to do is to provide strong direction. Be really clear with people, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do it, and then they can best get their oars in the water. So in the large group work that I had done early in my career, a lot of people saw me come along and they said, oh, this is the participation guy. And my answer, before I understood polarities, was sometimes. You know, when it best serves the cause, we'll have a lot of participation. And when it best serves the cause, we'll have a lot of direction. So the preferred future rate, which comes from work that Ron Lippitt did years ago in the 70s with Eva Schindler-Rainman, talks about what's your best future. And that is a combination of both the best of your past and present, but also compelling future possibilities. So the more that you can stretch the tension between these and make sure that, in fact, the past and present is really honored and the future possibilities are really envisioned, you can get a much better future than focusing on one or the other. In creating community, there's a quote that M. Scott Peck had in The Road Less Traveled, and he said, in and through community lies the salvation of the world. So here we talk about the healthiest communities are where the parts and the whole succeed. And in this case, we're talking about people achieving their full potential and the organization achieving its full potential. This could be business unit and organization, function and organization, but it's the part-whole polarity that leads to peak performance. The healthiest communities are the ones that can perform at the highest levels, whatever their function might be. And then thinking and acting in real time is the most unique principle, and it talks about faster results. So planning for your future and being in your future now is something that we look at. Typically, we spend a lot of time planning. We spend a lot less time grabbing a piece of the future and living it today. And then building understanding. So this is about, used to be creating a common database of strategic information, creating common understanding. But as I worked with Barry Johnson, I came to understand that common was a pole. So what we did is we opened this up to say building understanding is the key to learning and developing. So the more I can understand, and the best way to understand is to both inquire or be curious about what others are thinking and to advocate or be clear about what it is that I believe and think. So I want to pause again, having gone through the principles before we get into the application of the case to check in for any questions or comments people might have.
Jake?
Yeah.
This is Sherry.
Yeah, Sherry.
I was wondering, of course, I'm a big advocate of Ron's featuring technique, but also I have worked with appreciative inquiry in trying to work out people's futures, and that is also a very powerful approach to doing that. And have you tried that, or have you just worked with Ron's featuring technique, or just, I guess, wondered if you would comment on that?
Yeah, so this Play Well with Others, Sherry, there have been one project that I've been involved in personally, but others that others have been involved in, where you have the appreciative interviews. And that is picking up on that poll of the best of your past and present. And when you're looking at future possibilities, then that becomes a supplement to it. So this actually fits really well with AI stuff because it's very congruent with it. Now, I mean, there's a supplement to it in terms of that other poll, but it fits really well. In Ron's work, he talked about preferred futuring, but he also talked about things like the future nipping at our heels. And so all of the things around GLAD, SADS, and MADS, which was one of the ways that he gathered data, was, the GLADs were about the best of the past and present. So he had this embedded in his process, and that's where it came from.
Yes.
Other thoughts or questions before we move on?
This is Raj here. Had a question on grabbing the piece of the future and living it today. Can you just maybe give an example of what that meant?
Yeah. In fact, Raj, I think the next slide will give us a little bit of that, and then I'll give you an example. So this is a picture of Stan Davis, and he wrote this book, Future Perfect, in the early 80s. And he talked about this managing in the future perfect tense, which means as if it had already happened. So I'll give you a very simple example, but profound for the organization. I was in a meeting several weeks ago, and it was a sales meeting in this publisher that I'm working with. And there were about 4 or 5 people in the meeting. And as we were going forward, one of the things that came up was that the digital media specialist needed to be in the room because the things that they started to talk about from a sales standpoint included digital sales. But that person had never come to the meetings. The digital sales was fairly new in the organization. And so what we did is, we just stopped and we said, does that person need to be in the room? Yes. Would they be in the room if we were in our future today? They were like, yes. So he said, okay, why don't you go get them? And they're like, yeah, but we're halfway through the meeting. And I said, right. So there's half of the meeting left where you could live your future today. And they did go get this individual, brought him into the room. It's a simple example of reaching out in the middle of a meeting. But the more that people start to see some image of the future and live it today, the faster change occurs and the more the line blurs between the future and the present. So there's a notion of that we'll get to in the case as well. But does that help, Raj, in terms of a concrete example?
Yeah, that's perfect, actually. Makes sense, yes.
Great. So this is a question of where do you see the principles at play in the case story? So as I go through it, if you have those worksheets, I'm going to ask you to just start jotting some notes about where you see the different principles showing up. And these, I will tell you, are the actual sheets. I went in and did screenshots from the project plans, from the designs, from the meetings and emails. So this started, you can see it's from 2009, but I thought it was the best complete example I could show you in terms of a practicum piece. But it started in June, and you can see it started on the 4th, with initial timeline for feedback. The meeting was 3 weeks in the future, this 150-person meeting. There was no design, there was no venue, there were no materials, but from an RTSC standpoint, 3 weeks we looked at and said it was plenty of time. So from the 4th to the 8th, you can see I put in yellow a conference call, review purpose and outcomes, and review timeline. So the purpose and outcomes showed up from an RTSC standpoint very early in the process. Within the first few days, you can see on the 5th, we were already drafting them, and on the 4th, at the beginning, when we just signed the contract, we started to work on what the purpose and outcomes needed to be, because you could provide direction from that, but also, as you see the purpose and outcomes, they were an invitation for people to participate. So here on the 8th, we're talking about they want to generate excitement. So there's got to be energy in this in terms of looking at what the potential possibilities are, right? What's possible for the organization, what's possible for the people. And then this takes us through from a couple of weeks, from the 9th through the 23rd. But you can see that there were testing activities. The DMMs were district merchandising managers and buyers. So we were out road testing this. One of the things about RTSC is that there's like rapid prototyping. So how quickly can we learn something and test it and then continue to improve it? So short learning loops rather than big learning loops taking a long period of time. It's much more about short learning loops with rapid testing. And here, final corrections and approvals. Now remember, we started this project on the 8th, so 11 days later, we were ready with our handouts to go, final corrections and approvals. All of these things were ready because on the 26th was the meeting. So again, to look at what got done, we had a logistics team we had to train, the room needed to be set up, but starting with purpose and outcomes and being curious about what it was that people thought needed to occur, and then listening to others in terms of their advocating. So what was it that leaders thought needed to happen, and what was it that this design planning team that we had pulled together, what did they think needed to happen? So this is just in the pre-planning. Here's a picture of the principles with the predominant poll that the organization and the CEO favored being highlighted. And so when you can go in, the principles can be seen as a diagnostic instrument. So I can look at this and I can say, well, where are we doing really well and where do we need more attention? And you'll be able to, in the 5th session, do an assessment on the RTSC principles as polarities. And so you'll get a much more rigorous and numerical summary of this, but just looking at it, there was a lot of advocating in terms of building understanding, but less questions. Knowing the outside, there was a lot more focus on the marketplace and growth in the marketplace than there was inside the organization. The leadership was much more directive, but less participative in terms of what the strategy was, how it was going to be implemented. The future was much more appealing. There was a lot of energy about grow fast and a process of flow fast that they implemented, and it was all about looking forward, not so much looking back. And the organization was where the energy was. So individuals, what individual leaders needed, what development opportunities there were for people in the organization, how they were going to redefine their roles as individuals, all of that was not on the front burner in terms of the organization. And then planning for your future, you know, this envisioning compelling future possibilities and planning for your future went hand in hand. So there was a lot of time spent thinking about what the future needed to be. And this is one of the things that's just helpful to do as you get into an organization, is just kind of eyeball it and say, well, you know, what are my impressions from the conversations, from the notes, the emails, the messages, the documents, all these sort of things. You can play an anthropology role and start to understand where the emphasis is. Any questions on this before I move on? So here's another one of these snapshots that talks about, we started again on the 8th. The meeting was on the 26th. So the senior buyers, the senior leaders within this organization had a prep meeting. And why have a prep meeting is because we wanted to make sure that everybody was clear what their role was going to be, but also we wanted to pay attention so that these people could be successful. So this is a piece about the inside of the organization. The purpose and background that they had come up with was a starting point for the purpose and outcomes for the session. Here, we talked about what we want to know more about, right? Requirements and specifics. There was a panel that we were going to have about possibilities, other people who'd been moving down this path of growth ahead of the rest of the organization. And so we had them brainstorm a list of questions about, well, if we could have inquiry here around building understanding, what kinds of things would we want to know more about? And then this is the actual design of the meeting. And the reason I'm showing you these slides is because I want to take you behind the scenes of what work we actually did. So here you can see, build on what we've begun and accelerate our progress. So that sounds a whole lot like the preferred futuring principle right in that purpose. And then we used a know, be, do organizing principle for the outcomes. And so understanding the strategy. So as a directive strategy, what is it? Why is it needed? What are the timeframes and milestones? So this is all about what are the answers, but then in participation, think in new ways with a realistic assessment. What's ahead? What's it going to take for us to succeed? These were things that people in the room had to have conversations about to understand for themselves. And actions to begin now. So this is a piece about being in your future now. What could we begin immediately? And I've got some notes from this session to share with you. And move faster in creating our collective future. So again, short learning loops, small actions. We're talking about one or two that everybody can take to move the agenda forward, and then other ideas that we can produce and give to the leaders to say, yeah, we might try this. This might be another thing. So again, anything that moves the ball forward, and the faster you can move it, the better off you're going to be. So let me go through the agenda that we actually followed in this meeting and then pause before we get into the outcomes of it. So here again, some very basic things about getting connected in terms of name and so forth. But what ground rules do you want at your table that are going to help you work more effectively? So rather than saying these are the ground rules for the meeting or generate ground rules for the meeting, we said, look, you guys are going to have your own meeting at your own table throughout the day. What do you need to do to make it work? So again, here we're talking about how do we create a good community in each of these tables, and there were 8 people at the tables, 150 in the room. And then this section on what do we need to know. So the strategy got presented, and implementation specifics. It was something important that came up that said we want to know more from the buyers when we had that pre-meeting about what are the specifics and implementation experiences and ideas. So again, this was this piece that came from a panel to say, what is it that we want to learn from different areas and different countries that have started down this path in some way? What is it that we can learn through inquiry from them and learning about what was happening inside the organization? And then we had table discussions. Right? So this is common in large group settings that you'll have a presentation and then some table discussions looking at questions, and then we had a question and answer. And this was done in what we call max mix groups, and Sherry'd be familiar with these from the work that she's done, but this is about maximum mix. So what is it that we can do to get a cross-section of people mixed by function and level and tenure and gender and all the different ways that you can, because after lunch we had them come back in what they called role groups. And the reason was because you can put them in max mix groups in the beginning to learn, But when you make commitments, you got to make them from the role groups. So the role group talked very specifically about changes that they needed to be making, but also what do we need to keep doing? What concerns do we have? And how could we really screw this up? So again, the keep doing is a piece of the best of the past and present, and changes is about compelling future possibilities. We also encouraged people to talk about concerns that they had. So in a polarity standpoint, having resistance, there's wisdom in resistance. So what we did is we said, no, what concerns do you have? And how could we really screw it up? I mean, like if we had fun with this, and actually people did have fun with it, and they laughed and thought, some of these things we do every day. But this question of what do we do to really screw it up is a good one to use in terms of getting at it in the resistance in a way that you can celebrate it rather than fight against it. And then there was some posting of voting, and the had voting around what the biggest changes were and the most successful implementation. This was all done in their role groups, and then we came back to their mixed groups after this session. And then in the organization-wide action planning, so we talked about what are 2 high leverage actions. Again, what are things that we can do immediately that are going to make a difference, and what are 1 or 2 that we need to stay on track with the business we need to be doing today. So this whole notion of the future and the present was getting worked on throughout the sessions. And the leadership team walked around and they met during the next section, right, to make decisions on how to respond. So this is a notion of real-time in action, is that while the larger group was doing work here in terms of the individual reflection and action planning, the leadership team commitment meeting was being done by my colleague Jessie. And so she was talking about what are we going to commit and take forward, what do we need to review further, and what aren't we taking forward and why. So in the meeting itself, they had very concrete actions that they were agreeing to literally at the same time that they had been identified. And then they had a report out from that leadership team. And then there was a final piece about what do we need to know and what questions do we still have. And I'll show you in the output from the meeting how that got responded to very shortly after the meeting. And then finally, a good pulse check at the end. I used to call those evaluations, and Dick and Emily Axelrod that I've worked with said pulse check is a better term because it gets you out of a critic role. And so we're really taking a pulse of the group. So we had one of those at the end of the session. And that was the day of this sales meeting. This is start anywhere, be willing to go everywhere mantra of saying there's an opportunity here with a 150-person meeting. Let's step into it. So let me pause again and check for any questions that people might have.
Jake, it's
Yeah.
Sherry again. I think the work around taking the... Oh.
Go ahead, Sherry.
Okay, so just quickly, I think it's really crucial, the portion of the work, you take people to their future and get them to work there. I think the transport there to make people truly believe they're in their future and have them do quality work there. And so I'm very interested in how you set that up. Because so often, if that's not done with the right spirit, the meeting sort of falls apart or people don't take that work really seriously. So I'm really looking forward to see your setting that up. I've seen Kathy and Ron do that, but I'd really like to see you do that. And I'm going to be looking at that portion of the work with you. And that's just my ad. Thank you.
Great. How about others in terms of where you saw the principles showing up in the meeting? Were there any thoughts and comments people have from notes that they've been taking about the principles and each of the poles of the principles?
Jake, this is Raj. I'm just getting I'm thinking of only now since I came in a little late. But one of the things I wanted to just that flashed in my mind was this client of ours is, let's say, if they are in some kind of a, like on a black hole, there is this time horizon where time is kind of stopped. They are in that, you could say the kind of time is stopped for them, and they don't seem to be able to move out of that cultural, I don't know if you want to call that some kind of fix. They're in a cultural mode beyond which they are unable to move. The culture of that company has been there for about 10-15 years now.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, somebody like us, let's say, walks in, and then it's difficult for them to even think about moving out of their that kind of
Yeah, so one of the things, Raj, that helped in this case for sure was the leader. And the leader was, very forward-looking and very encouraging to people to think and do things differently. Now, in some ways, that was a gift. In other ways, it was a challenge because paying attention to the present was not something that he did a lot of. But in terms of doing things differently, I mean, people were affirmed and rewarded for finding new, better, faster ways to do business. And so that's what, everybody was on about in this organization. And so that made it a lot easier. And Sherry, that was also something that occurred to me when you asked your question, is a good leader who's clear about what they want and what they want to reward, and then having an organization designed to do that will make a huge difference.
Right. Jake, I was going to say also, if it's okay, that in this work that you do, it's critical to have someone be with a leader or the leadership team and work with them simultaneously.
Right.
Because the leader is learning just as much.
Yep.
Or they're so ahead and they've learned, but they're really reacting to the work that's being done just in time. And that reaction is critical for this process to work. And the principles of this being so just in time and so almost ahead of his time is the leader's reaction to the work right there.
Yeah, and Sherry, that's one of the reasons it's smart to work in teams.
Exactly.
Because it's too much to pay attention to the group and the leaders and being able to support the leaders and having them be successful. So there is a lot going on at the same time. And so, one of the things I want to do is go through some of the output of this meeting, because, the agenda is one thing and you can go through that and understand the process, but the results are something else. And those also speak to the whole notion of real time. So one of these I showed in the introductory session as well, but how much clearer do you feel about the strategy? And you can see the numbers here are pretty darn good, 6.2, and somewhat clear. There were 3 people out of 150 or so that answered that way. Here, how confident are you that we'll move forward successfully as a company? And again, here's a 6.3. And again, 2 people who had it as a 4. So a lot of confidence in the organization and in the people who were in the meeting. How much do you feel people were heard and taken seriously? Again, 6.2. There were 4 people at a 3 and a 4. So the messages that got sent, when you go and you say, what are your best ideas, and then immediately meet and come up with responses to those and feed those back, 60 minutes later, people get that you're taking them seriously. And it does a lot to make a difference, not just because the ideas take hold sooner, but because the confidence of the community that you're creating is much stronger. Here's the meeting actions, and I pulled these out just to give you an example of like the level of details they were working on. You can see the first one is around laptops. Polycom phones, if you need one, please send the request to this person stating where the conference phone is to be used. And so it was at that level that they got to. And one day, in 8 hours, they got to the specifics of how you get a phone. A change team is being established here for work plans for all the issues that were identified at the meeting. Each function will have a work stream leader. So these were all decisions. They were not things that were clear going into the meeting. Nobody had identified any of this going into the meeting, but coming out of it, they were going to make sure they balanced their workloads to make sure they're available for the coaching of new and experienced buyers. So this whole notion that you're talking about, Sherry, of things happening quickly and leaders needing support showed up in the meeting outcomes from the decisions that they were going to act on in 30 days. This one I just point out because of the level of specificity and detail. That the new laptop computers, these are all the specifics, that weight would be a maximum of 3.3 pounds with a second battery in place. So this is unusual in my experience for most organizations to come out of a 150-person meeting with this level of detail and this level of clarity. But this was something that was a very RTSC outcome. Here, there was what was working on the timeline. So now, remember this meeting was held on June 26th. So here, there was a group that everybody would be informed by the July 10th, which is 2 weeks, what a project entails, who's going to be working on it, what the timescales are. So things were moving very quickly after the meeting, just like they were moving very quickly in the meeting. You see here as well, merchandising will be going through a similar process as buying. Roles and responsibilities will be established. Their initial session will occur before the end of August, which it did. And then international communications plan throughout our businesses. And then here, oh, there's a loose end. It's going to be ready by when? And so that had to get picked up in the next piece that came forward. And then here is a summary of what is going to follow. And so I put this in because the piece at the bottom in this report, the gold is in the details. And the pace of change needs to take into account how to balance the need to move fast and deliver strong business results, which is another possible polarity in terms of, speed and quality would be a way to look at it. This, you're not going to be able to read, but hopefully what you will be able to see is that around each of these high leverage actions, these were the ideas. Remember, people were like, well, what are the best ideas for high leverage actions? And then they sorted them into vision, strategy, systems, communication, work processes, structure. These were all things that came up as ideas that then needed to be reviewed, but they were documented immediately after the meeting. And you can see this is just another page of them in terms of what the content was coming out of the meeting. Here's what are 1 or 2 things we need to do to stay on track. So remember, there were things about change and there are things about stay the same. These are all things that they had identified in these same categories that they need to keep doing that they were doing today. Now, here we're following along the timeline. So the meeting was on the 26th of June. So the next week, July 1st, this communication came out, right? Last week, sharing on the strategy. So our perceived wisdoms and how we approach our day jobs. It will mean adopting a new, more mobile approach across Europe, becoming an expert and a specialist in a designated market. So they started to define what the new work was. Even as they weren't clear to put it into a job description, it was starting to say, as a leader sent this out, the CEO, and he's like, this is what I think we're learning so far. We reflect on our working practices and all seek efficiencies and new ways of working. So again, this is a very decentralized view that says there's a lot of participation. I want each of you looking at that. And here, what the goal is, 26 new stores across 2 brands in 3 countries in just 6 weeks. It's a lot of work. And then rolling actions. So they had systems development and intake group. These were all things that came out on July 1st, right? And they were talking about here, communication including project goals to be circulated by July 10th. So all of the time frames that we're looking at are short, and the objectives are small enough, bite-sized pieces that you can get them done. And then on July 6th, there was another communication that came out. Now, with immediate effect, buying will move to a new organizational structure. So think about the speed at which they're doing this work, how clear they are, and how smart they're getting by taking these steps as fast as they are. This was a picture then of what the new buying regions looked like. So they literally had identified where they were on a map of Europe and what was going to be a shared function and which was going to be a vertical function. So all of these were getting identified. And again, July 6th is about 10 days after the meeting. So the question that I have is that as you look at the principles, right, my question is, where do you see them at play? This is just one start to a project, one start to the case study, and we're going to be following this case study through the practicum. That may not be a perfect fit for you. You may not have a 150-person meeting coming up, but my hope is that as we better understand the principles and that they apply here, you'll be able to better understand the principles and how they apply there, being in your project. So I'm going to open the floor at this point to talk, let you talk a bit about the principles with questions you may have or observations that you may have.
Jake, this is Bert. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Bert. Thanks so much.
One of the things you began talking about is the way that RTSC dances with already existing mental models we might have. And, you know, as I was looking down through, you know, the agenda, the way the day was built, and inviting people to look from a variety of different angles, in particular, what could go wrong, I was noticing that making reality a key driver and the polarities involved there inside and outside the organization reminded me so much of SWOT analysis. And that was just something that makes such good sense. And, you know, I like the frame here better than SWOT, but that was something that, yeah, just kind of created a little light bulb for me about what the association was for that thing.
Yeah, neat. And Bert, the SWOT analysis from a polarity standpoint, we say that a SWOT analysis could be seen as a snapshot, like a 35 millimeter camera, or at this point, an iPhone camera. And polarity would give you the dynamic of the movement through those quadrants. And so it would give you a movie camera view. And because we're talking polarities, both of them add value, right? Having that snapshot is really helpful. And having the movie is really helpful. As we got further into this project, and you'll see in the practicum, is polarities became more visible both to us and to the client. And we talk at one point about creating a new model of consulting. And you know, one of the things was you know, the work being done by them and the work being done by us. And we actually took on more of the work quite consciously, which is a little counter Peter Block, but we had decided that would best serve the client. So having that kind of SWOT analysis in the beginning of the session was really helpful because it affirmed for everybody that we can look at our weaknesses, that we can look at things that may go wrong, that, you know, our vision may have some downsides to it. And so it was really freeing for people to be able to have that level of input in a, you know, public forum.
Permission to be messy.
Exactly.
Yeah. Sweet. Thank you.
Yeah. Others?
Jake, this is Becky. Hi, everybody.
Hey, Becky.
hear me?
Yeah, just good, just well.
Okay, my question has to do with how great a necessity is it to have somebody in the mix who can exude the level of confidence that you do about speed. I've worked with you, and so I know just how articulate and how much passion you bring to the "we can do this now. Let's get this done quickly." How much of that was required in this situation? And if you think of other situations, how much of that sort of bring that confidence to the game is required?
Yeah, that's a
great. Do I make any sense?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I'm a little bit like fish in water, right? So it's like since there's no way to control for the variable called Jake, it's hard to know. I do know that in this case, the leader, the CEO, was very driven by speed and by making things happen fast. And so from that standpoint, I certainly had the concept, and we had some tools. Jessie Stoner, who, by the way, I really commend you to go to her blog. She has an award-winning blog, like top 10, top 50. A lot of different people have given her awards. And it's called C Point Center with an E, C Point, or Jessie Stoner, Jesse Stoner. So she was also well versed in RTSC. And so between the two of us, I think we were able to sort of work the brake and the accelerator in a way that worked for the organization. And because the CEO was such a proponent and fan of getting things done quickly, it was, in some ways we were hitting the brake for him because of his organization. And I would say, there's a passion and then there's a experience piece of it. And so I think that if you're looking at the work that you're doing and you're saying, I would like to try out the RTSC principles and approach in my work, I'm not sure how passionate I am about it, then I think that you sort of manage that process so that it works for you. I don't think that to have RTSC work, you have to almost like fully embrace it even. You can just use it in a light way, LITE, to see, okay, let's see how it goes. And then based on your own confidence and your own commitment to it, you can ratchet that up and see more opportunities. But my experience with people learning it has been that it becomes more like a flywheel. And so a flywheel is that thing that's really big that sometimes is hard to get started. But as you start to push on it, it goes faster and faster. And at the end, you're getting a ride for free. So I think that that's been my experience in teaching it to people, is that it's more like that, where you start slower, but it will earn its own keep. I don't know if that answers your question.
That's excellent. Thank you.
Jake,
yeah.
This is Sherry. I think maybe going on what the last speaker said, I think to me what really stood out was the communication strategy. And a company that goes up the next day after they've had this large meeting with communication to the organization, and then, 6 days later or 10 days later, I think a lot of companies underuse communication as part of their OD strategy. And for them to be so transparent about what they're doing and the timing and all that, to me, showed a lot about their CEO and his comfort factor in advertising or communicating his strategy and what he's doing to the rest of the organization as almost a, we are going to do this is part of our strategy, can't do attitude. And I was very impressed with that. And can you speak a little bit about that, or who thought of that, or whose idea was that?
Well, yeah. I mean, one of the funny stories about this was during the day when we got over there a couple days before the meeting, and we had talked with the CEO, but we hadn't met with them. and he was so driven by accountability. I mean, he just so for him, the reason to get the information out was so that he could hold people accountable. And he was just on and on and on about this. And so from a polarity standpoint, I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, well, what's missing, right? And the other side of accountability is some form of support, right? So and you know, I said to him, Paul was his name, and I said, you know, so how's that accountability thing working for you? Sort of like Dr. Phil. And he was like, you know, it's not working at all. People aren't going on. And so we said, well, maybe if we provided enough support, then we could hold them accountable. But you can't hold them accountable if they don't have enough support to fulfill their accountabilities, which was a whole different idea. So, you know, you can send that information out so that you can hold people accountable to what they're committing to. And by the way, that also goes for the leadership team, because they had things that they were accountable for that they needed to act on. And that information becomes a huge kind of support for the organization, because people know what they're supposed to do. They know what other people are supposed to do. You know, there was that one question mark, you know, I showed you, it's like, it's going to be done by, and it's like, well, you know, a lot of stuff happens in these meetings. Not everything gets written down. And it was like, okay, well, there's a question mark, so we need to answer the question. But that notion of speed without information, and, you know, you had said, Bert, you know, this whole thing about making reality a key driver. If that information isn't available, this process doesn't work. And in the opening sessions to this, I think I may have spoken about Thomas Jefferson, but he has a quote from 1820 that I found in Marv Weisbord's Productive Workplaces that says, if we think the people of the society not enlightened enough to exercise their discretion in a wholesome way, our job is not to take it from them, but to do so that they may. So discretion informing is a huge piece of RTSC, and then you can give people a lot of freedom to go make things happen in the world if, in fact, their discretion's informed, they've got a clear picture of the strategy, they know what their work is. You don't have to micromanage anybody when they have that much information available to them. So in this case, you know, putting that out to the whole organization was like, hey, this is what we're on about, and you can't move fast if you don't have information. Other
this is Merge Simon. A question that I have in looking back on this case study, here you had your CEO engaged in this meeting that was going to involve change for a lot of people in the organization. So to me, it looked like it was really important for them to achieve their outcomes, to have been led in that meeting by their CEO. And I'm wondering if you have some insight on that, the particular role a CEO plays when you're talking about achieving change that ultimately will involve the entire organization, and how that relates when the project at hand may also be a fully horizontal project throughout the organization, but it is not led by the CEO. It's led by a VP or a project manager.
Yeah, so Merge, what I would say is we go back to the mantra of start anywhere, be willing to go everywhere. Becky and I, a couple years ago, worked on a project that the CEO was not front and center. It was actually the senior vice president of HR. and there was a subgroup of the senior leadership team that met, at 6:30 in the morning with the senior vice president of HR as the convener of it, and they came up with plans for what the senior leadership team would do, and they would bring it back to the senior leaders and get sign off, and then senior leaders would take materials to their parts of the organization and get input around what the strategy was. There was a lot more work done in HR than there was anywhere else, but what happened was over time it started to take hold in different parts of the organization. So Becky, I don't know if you can put yourself off of mute and just say a couple things in terms of what you heard as the impact from that, because it was not a neat and tidy textbook CEO-led effort.
No, yeah, I don't know what you want me to say, Jake. The effort had a high stickability factor. It's still ongoing in the organization, although Jake and I are no longer there on a regular basis. But I think what it showed to the team was that they didn't need the CEO in the room or making the decisions in order to move forward. And this was unusual for this team. They, generally speaking, did not move without the CEO. So just the part that Jake was saying in terms of the team making some decisions and moving forward and getting input from their organization. And this is a 20,000 person organization, so we're not talking a small company. Just for them to commit to each other and do that was a huge change. And they did it more quickly than they had ever done in the past. So I guess I would say that's an example of an organization and a situation where the CEO was not required.
Yeah, and Merge, I have, thanks, Becky. I have, a half dozen other stories that, we worked with the vice president of medical affairs in a huge hospital corporation, not the CEO, and that was around implementing a managed care mode of practice, and it worked really well. Now we were blessed in some ways because this VP of medical affairs is incredibly talented, but it does, from an RTSC standpoint, it doesn't always have to be that CEO. It makes it easier in a lot of ways, like in this case, but there are other stories of where things start other places, which is why I use that mantra today. Raj, you raised your hand?
So Jake, I need to go actually, I have to go to work now. It's 7 a.m. So I'm already a little late to, get ready for the morning. So the question I had before I left, I can't resist this. I wish I had time to, be longer on this call. But one of the things I noticed is, Jake, and somebody just brought it up as well, that you are extremely articulate, and the way you put things, it's so well understood, and it's so effortless, for somebody to understand you. Or at least I do. But I think that also might be a key to making that real-time impact when you are talking to or making strategic changes, right? So I think people may not always be blessed with somebody like you. So I'm just wondering how these principles themselves might make sense to people, but there may be other abilities you may need to have in order to make this come into action, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I think I appreciate that, and I don't know, Becky's worked with me. There's a boatload of stuff that I'm not terribly good at and need a lot of help with. And so I think that partnering with people is really important. And so as you get into, applying these principles, and, I put the principles on the table and asked people, well, how do you think we're doing on these, in terms of the organization? So there are, more complicated and less complicated ways to get into this. And what the practicum is designed to do is to step by step take you through a process where you can play with these in work that you're doing in a way that you are most comfortable. And if you bump up against somewhere and you go, geez, I'm not sure, that's where the unlimited coaching comes in, because I'm readily available to help you think through what's going to work best for you. And we all have our own way and our style. And I grew up learning from Kathy Dannemiller, and for those of you who had the opportunity to meet her, she was in many ways a savant in terms of large-scale change. And so it was a little intimidating to be working with her. And at the same time, what she did, I could never do. And then what I ended up doing, she could never do. So figuring out what our own sweet spot is around this work, I think, makes it a lot more fun to do the work, but also a lot more effective to do the work. And as you go through these principles and start to understand them better and apply them and test them, I think what you'll find is your own version of what I sound like for myself. And, I've spent 20 years doing this, so I'm going to sound a little different than you all who are in some version starting it now. 30 years. Sorry. I'm a little older than I gave myself credit for.
Yeah, okay, Jake, thank you so much. I think I wish I could stay longer, but I have to go. Thank you so much.
Well, you'll be able to see the recording, and thanks so much for waking up early.
Right. Bye-bye.
Anything else from folks? We've gone a little past time, but I want to honor the commitment that we've had. Are there any last questions that we could get to, or you can use Basecamp for that? What I have is some opportunities where the principles, I identified how those showed up. And these are in the slides that I sent to you so that you can look at the specifics around the principles and where those showed up. And what we'll do in the future sessions is make sure that we go through each of those slides with the principles and speak to them. And what I also do is I will do a short YouTube video that takes you through the principal pages that I just went through, so that you'll be able to see those and hear me talk about those, and I'll upload those as well as another item for YouTube. Would that be helpful?
Yes.
That would be very helpful.
That would be great.
You bet.
Okay. So thank you for this evening. I will upload this and the other section that I just mentioned to you and have those up on YouTube. I expect to have those up tomorrow.
Cool.
Super.
Thanks, Jake.
All right. Thanks so much, folks.
Great first
Jake,
session.
Good.
Jake, do we have an assignment
Yes,
to work
I will
on
send.
between now and the next meeting?
Yes, you do.
Oh, yeah, good question.
I will send that out as a video link for you so that you'll have the homework assignment, but then you'll also have an example of me completing the assignment. So you'll have some sense of this is what it looks like when I've done the assignment. So those will be coming out to you as well in the next day or two.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thanks for asking so that you didn't have to wonder. All right then.
All right, good night.
Thanks so much, folks.
Okay. Thank you. Good night.
Bye.